Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. All right, Sally, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah. So what are you currently working on?
Because I paint a lot of portraits, I don't do that exclusively, but a lot of my art practice is portraiture. So at the moment, I have portrait commissions. So I guess if I said I was working on something, that would be the main thing. It's not exclusively so, but yeah, mainly portrait commissions.
Wow. And how many commissions do you normally work on at a time?
Well, it depends a bit. It depends if I've got a lot or a few, and what's sort of coming up in a year. But I quite often will have 2 or 3 going at once.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and that's could be for a whole lot of reasons. It's not because I just prefer to. I actually quite like to finish one painting at a time, but sometimes I have to move between one and another.
Yeah. Well, I guess, it's interesting. When I was looking at your work, I was like, oh my goodness, like you've probably done 403,690 million portraits. Like it, it looked like you did a lot of portraits.
No, I have to say I haven't done that many. I've only been painting for 10 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Wow.
not that. Painting, oil painting, that is. I didn't pick up oil paints till 10 years ago.
So
what
were you doing before that?
Well, I used to teach. I was a teacher, but I used to also for many years paint ceramics. So a bit like Italian ceramics, you were talking about doing mosaics. And
Yeah.
I used to paint ceramics for many years and got quite heavily involved, travelled to Italy studying design and pattern and glazes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for a while, but had never sort of touched oil painting or figurative painting seriously, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's funny. My first award I ever won in art was for painting a ceramic.
Yeah.
And I was really, really young, but I was like, what? I won first place, and I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, I just really I love design, and I love pattern. It's just something that has always really appealed to me. So, it wasn't hard to fall in love with all of it. I really did. So I did that for a few years. Yeah.
Nice. Now you said you went to Italy to do that. Like, where did you go? And like, what was it, an apprenticeship or like?
No, just travel, but it was the travel was specifically for people who were interested in ceramics, and it was through Central Italy and then even down to the south, looking at the different styles of painting that are in different regions of Italy, I guess. And then just kind of exploring the various techniques that they had used in different areas. So it was just for my own interest. It wasn't an actual official course or anything like that. But yeah, it was a bit of an obsession there for a while.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Huh. That's cool. So then what happened that made you make the leap into portraiture or into painting? Like,
I think I always wanted to do it. I think I always liked figurative work and fancied being able to paint, but really didn't think for a whole lot of things. Self-doubt would probably be the biggest reason I didn't do it. Just thinking, well, there's so many people who are amazing painters out there and amazing artists, and what made me think I could do this. But I really wanted to, and I didn't know how to get started, I suppose. I just didn't know where to go to learn techniques or anything like that. And then 10 years ago, I just had an event in my life that changed my thinking, I suppose, and it just became a catalyst to say, right, it's now or never. I'm going to go and paint. I'm going to find the right place to learn to do what it is I want to do. So, it was more of a life event that just changed and sent me in a new direction.
My mind wants to ask you a question, but I'm terrified to ask it, so therefore I'm going to ask it. This life-changing event, were you bitten by a radioactive spider and you turned into like a superhero of painting, or was it?
Yeah, I'd like to think it was that exciting. No, it was actually brain surgery 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. So literally it changed your way of thinking.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, no, I have a genetic thing. Like my son, I have a 26-year-old son,
Uh-huh.
and 10 years ago he had a brain hemorrhage from a ruptured aneurysm.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's lucky because he survived, and he's one of the few people out there who survives a brain bleed from an aneurysm. But they discovered it was a genetic thing, and he had managed to get that from me. So we both had brain surgery in the same year, 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. And you seem fine. Did he turned out okay, or?
Thanks for saying I seem fine. I'm not sure, but we're really lucky. So
Okay.
he is fine. And as I said, we're one of the happy stories that come out of something like this. But it was a moment where I thought, this is something I want to do. He seemed to be so resilient, despite a lot of things that he was told that he wouldn't be able to do in the future. And I thought, what's wrong with me? Just, I've said I wanted to paint. Now it's now or never. Just go and do it. Doesn't matter if I'm hopeless. Doesn't matter if I'm great. Just go and do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I have a friend, a beautiful friend named Bobby Wood, and met him in college. And I guess when he was about 17 or 18, he was in Belgium, and he loved doing mountain biking. And he fell once and hit his head, and he woke up that night screaming because his head was hurting, and they went to the hospital and they said, there's nothing wrong with him, just send him home, right? And but he was so much pain that his mom took him across from Belgium to whatever next country, to another country, and he had a hemorrhage, and so he always had like a limp when he walked, and his speech went, and it was weird because he was one of the coolest people because like he lived, like he would say like the doctors told him that he wouldn't live like a year or two or whatever it was, and he's like, that was 18 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And
you can hear some pretty inspiring stories. I mean, I think really we're just very, very lucky. So I suppose what you might consider to be a life trauma, I think really turned into be quite a positive in many ways in terms of my life, his life, our family life. Yeah, major changes, I guess, in the way we lived.
Yeah. Wow. So I mean, I guess you went for it then.
Yeah.
And did he go for something in his life?
Yeah, we're both doing the same thing. I mean, remarkably now, it's amazing. We've actually, I don't know if you follow Instagram or anything, but we've both put paintings up on Instagram just recently. And he's been a student of mine in the last 12 months, an art student.
Nice.
He's painting now, and he's done a few different things. He's actually very artistic all the way around. He plays music, he writes, and paints, and so we're very fortunate. But that's the line he's gone down. So we're quite similar, more similar than perhaps he'd be happy with, really.
Mom, I'm not going to wear a dress, I tell you.
Yeah. But if we've got too many things in common apart from really, I think. Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, so this event happens. Tell me about your first portrait commission.
Look, I think I was really lucky because I just uh, just started. I went to an art school in Sydney called the Julian Ashton Art School. It is the only art school in Australia that teaches classical painting and drawing. Where there are schools all over the US and in Europe where you can go and do this sort of training. This is the only place in Sydney that you can do this. And look, I just walked in there 5 weeks after brain surgery, and I went into a class where they were teaching you to draw from casts and you move lines by millimetres. And rather than feeling frustrated and awful, I just felt like it was my hallelujah moment. I was just so excited to be there. So having sort of been, going to the school and drawing, people family and friends started to notice that I was drawing and said, oh, look, that's looking pretty good, and said, would you do a drawing for me or a painting for me? And I was very fortunate that one particular relative decided to commission me for not only a portrait of herself, but her 10 grandchildren. Wow. Once putting that out there, it just seemed to feed off that, I guess, really. Just more people kept asking me to do portraits, and that's how it began. It was not something I planned to do; it just evolved.
Now, was that so that was like 11 different images that you painted? Yeah. Oh, wow!
One painting and 11 and 10 drawings. That was my first.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow. So, you did do a lot of work.
I'm quite obsessed. I don't know if I guess a lot of people get obsessed about their painting or drawing, but there are not many days that I don't paint or draw.
That's awesome.
Might be Sundays I don't paint and draw very much because sometimes you got to shop and clean the house. But other than that, I'm painting or drawing. It's it is an obsession, really.
That's cool. I love it. So where did you, or how did you figure out that you had this talent or this skill set with drawing?
Well, it actually was just going to the school, really, to the Julian Ashton Art School. And for me, I've been to a number of different art schools over the years where I just have been completely dissatisfied with what it was I was learning. It just never hit the mark for me. And I guess I'm just a classical-minded person. I'm a realist. So when I entered this school, they teach anatomy and they teach you to draw accurately and they teach you to see. And for me, that was the life-changing moment, I guess. And it was there that people, I suppose, just around me, other students, teachers, just the positive feedback that I got through that institution in the first instance. And I think too, just deciding that, whereas I may have always worried when I was younger that there was somebody perhaps always better than me and, I wasn't I was okay but not that great, I just decided to not worry about it just get out there and enjoy it and do what I love regardless. And I suppose I just got positive feedback from people. That's where it really sort of started, I guess.
So you brought up this self-doubt two times now. So that tells me that the muse wants us to go in that direction and spend a little time there. That's something not only artists but just humans in general deal with. There's a little talk I share with people about Adam, the devil, and Jesus. But it's all about self-doubt or being haughty. And it was always interesting in this story, it says that Lucifer wanted to, he began to think about, he was this being that had light come out of him, right? And he was the most beautiful angel and all these things, and he was in charge of music and all these things in the heavens. But what happened was, according to the story, is that he began to think that that he was the source of his own light. And so therefore he wanted to ascend even above God. And so he was cast out of heaven. And when he fell, he took 1/3 of the angels with him, right? Because he thought he was bigger and better than he was. And then there's this so I parallel that with the story of Adam and Eve, uh, because when in the story says that God made them in His image and His likeness, and yet the deception is that if they ate of this fruit, that they would become like God, right? Because they would have
Mhm.
this knowledge, but they already were. And so what I realized was like, whoa, like they thought of themselves lesser than what they were. And it says because of this sin, like this thing, all of humanity went with them. So one lesson one could pull is, if you're going to fall, it's probably better to think that you're better than you are.
Right.
Because you only take 1/3 of the, population with you.
Yeah.
But so often the human thinks that they're lesser than they are. And it's a
Mm.
self-doubt. And I always tell people, like, the great sin wasn't that they ate of some fruit or was sex or whatever people try to make it. It's self-doubt. Like, they doubted who they were.
Mm.
And it's so, you see it everywhere. It's just this fear that I'm not good enough, or if I try, I'm going to get hurt. um,
Mm.
and this doubt. Uh, so here you are. You brought it up a couple times, and but now it seems like you're on the other side of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I still struggle with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That whole thing, really. I guess, and it's not so much whether. I think it's sort of more now just a constant or often having to come back to remind yourself of why you started doing this in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the art world's sort of, or what I perceive the art world to be, is quite a competitive place, and there are times when especially when, I mean, Australia's got a lot of art prizes here. I mean, it's sort of a bit like sport, with art
Mm-hmm.
prizes here in this country. And a lot of how people become recognised as artists here is through art prizes. And if you get rejected frequently, which I do, I think you can get a sense of feeling like, oh, well, maybe, there's something wrong with what I do. And really, you sort of got to keep reminding yourself, you got to get back to why you're doing it in the first place, which is,
Mm-hmm.
it's not about anything but, for me, it's really about the process. I actually just love painting. And sometimes I have to just occasionally tell myself that.
That's cool. That's cool
Yeah.
because that's the big key of it.
Mm.
Is you know, I know in my own drawing, when I'm just flowing and I'm not really caring what people think, there's a certain style that I draw in, and it always comes out cool. Like, I look at it, I'm like, that's cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time before I allowed that to say and own it, because I thought, nah, it's not quote unquote real enough. It's not, it's too stylized. And so I would try to push and push and, and get that realism or whatever. And then, and I knew for years and years that I was trying to, like, merge myself to a standard that had nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I just felt like, no, I have to prove to the world that I have skill. Right. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm, and then I don't know, like, as I got older, it became easier just not to give a crap, like, and really just say and own yourself, and understanding that who you are is a collection of successes and flaws, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's that beautiful combination that makes you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I think I'm going to paraphrase it, but Van Gogh once said, "You can't be on the North Pole and the equator at the same time. So pick a line.
Mm-hmm.
My line will be color."
Mm.
And I was like, what? Like, okay. And that's when I decided that, my strength, my mark in art history will be
Mm-hmm.
within the realm of design and composition and storytelling. Like that will be what it will be, right? And from that point on, as long as my compositions work and the design's there and the story's there, then I don't really care if the realism is there or if it's given me a little more freedom just to enjoy my stylized approach to things, right? um but just I would encourage artists to look at your flaws and embrace them, and I have a mentor. He always tells me this story, and I'll share it with you guys. There's a boy, and his dad buys him a horse. And so everybody in the town says, "Oh my gosh, look at your son is so lucky. He's so blessed. You bought him a horse." And as his son's out there riding um, the horse, he falls off the horse and breaks his leg. "Oh my gosh, he's cursed. Oh my gosh, this is such a bad thing. Um, and then the war breaks out. And so the military comes in and starts taking, the people. And, but because they come to the boy, he has a broken leg, he can't go off to war. "Oh my gosh, you're so lucky that yeah, you have to go off to war." Like,
Mm.
and so you get the point of the story. Like one
Yeah.
thing is a good, and then it turns into a bad, and then it turns into a good, and it's just like it just all depends on your perspective and how you see things. And so, um, uh, I remember a statement that said the moon has two sides. It always has a light and a dark side, and there's just a beautiful balance in that. And so I encourage people, like, maybe your weaknesses aren't necessarily a weakness, bet on your
Mhm.
strengths, things like that. What advice would you give someone who is really struggling with that self-doubt?
I suppose, yeah, that's hard because, I guess for me, one of the things that's sort of been for me is that I had a moment there where all of a sudden you kind of look at life being potentially over very
Mm-hmm.
quickly. Think, what haven't you done? And I guess I would sort of want to be able to give someone the idea that if you died, or if you had a week to live, or you were dying tomorrow, what would you like to look back on your life and say, I had a go at this. I didn't regret not sort of doing this. And I guess there's a little bit of that in it. It's sort of that perseverance, or with that whole self-doubt thing, is that you've sort of you've got to throw 100% at something. And if it takes you on a journey in the way you thought it was going to go, great. But if it takes you a different direction, that's great too. But it's just sort of getting out there and actually giving something a genuine go. I guess
Mm-hmm.
with worrying about necessarily whether the exact right outcome came to your goal. I don't know if that's actually so important in the end. It's actually just I think I would just say, be brave and just put a foot out there, and not to over worry about that. I think there's an awful lot of that, of people over worrying about where some great moment or some, pinnacle or whatever, and it actually is just one foot after another. I think that's what I would say. It's just take a step.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Mm.
awesome. And with the steps, there's going to be many, many steps, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You just got to take one step. If there's self-doubt, just take a step, because it will lead somewhere. It mightn't lead where
yep,
you imagine it's going to go, but it will lead somewhere. And for one reason or another, and it's that's better than inactivity. That's better than just sitting
absolutely,
there doing nothing.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
was reading a book by Kenyon Cox. It was called, I think, The Classic Spirit. And in there, he said something that shocked me. He said, the 24 canvases of Monet. And I'm like, what? Wait. 24 canvases of Monet. And then it dawned on me, like, we think of Monet and we think this great artist who had this great career. And he did have a career, and but at some level, and I guess he did caricatures and things like that. But but we, he was, I think, in his 80s or something when he painted these lilies, right? But like that's what we know him of, right? Know him for, and 24, it quantifies it. It's like that's not. I mean, that's a lot of paintings, especially big ones, but it's also not a lot, it's it was a moment in his life that he came to that the rest of the world knows him for. And oftentimes, with all of the steps that have to be taken, just getting up every day, moving forward, right? Fall in love with something so at least you can get your butt out of bed and move forward to something. I always, it's a strange thing. It's a thought that I've been thinking a lot about lately and over the last couple of years, but a lot lately that when we die, people will never remember us as we were. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe. For a lot of people, that's probably the case.
Most people will be forgotten because they never lived a life to actually be remembered, right? Because they haven't given a go at something intensely. But the people who do give a go at it, what they're building is a legend. And the legend may be not the same as the reality, but that's okay, because I think that's actually a very beautiful thing. And when you're conscious of it, you can actually live a life that leaves that legacy, leaves that legend, and leaves that story. And in that story, there's only going to be maybe 5 moments in your entire life, that are just these moments that people will remember. And that kind of, and for me, that gives it gives me a lot of calm, because it's like, okay, that may be something, maybe every 10 to 15 years, there might be a big moment, a shift that becomes a pinnacle moment. And just seeing it that way, it just chills me out. It gives me a lot of patience to persevere. And to go through the hard work that's required to become great in whatever it is that you're going to do, and so one step. So our collective advice to people who are beginning to maybe doubt themselves in certain things is just one step at a time. Find something that you're willing to give a genuine, serious 100% of your effort go at something, be it painting or whatever it might be. And look long term at the moments.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, when it comes to art, I think, your perseverance is probably one of the best qualities you can have. I think it's, if you want to take it seriously, if you want to take art more than, say, being a hobby, certainly I would say that would be a bit like talent's just a little tiny bit of it, but certainly perseverance, and taking a step in a direction. I think taking a step in a direction is just a life lesson, regardless of what it is you choose to do. And I think the older you get, the more you sort of see it in various people, and where you feel that they are concerned or worried or whatever, and I desperately want to say to them, look, just take a step, and you never know what will happen next.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's this this is weird, but this image that I keep getting of mountaintops, right? Like, because at the mountaintops are the great moments, like you achieve something or whatever, right? But the truth is like you're either in 4 steps. There's 4 steps to this process. You're either at the mountaintop, or you're, which is usually really, really small amount of space because it's just a tip. um, but the rest of the journey, you're either struggling to get up the mountain or you're falling down the mountain
Yeah,
or
yeah.
you're in the valley, you
Yeah,
know?
I kind of see it more as a roller coaster ride.
Yeah,
You're never on one level for very long. It's up, down, and it's around and everywhere. That's how it is.
exactly.
Mm.
Uh, that's awesome. Awesome. So, there was a portrait that I saw. I wanted to give you a compliment on some of your work here. One thing I enjoyed about your work is the portraits that you were painting. There's some way, and I don't know how you do it, but there's some way that you're able to make the flesh feel warm. Like it almost feels like you can feel a temperature in the people. Um, do you know what I'm talking about?
Um, well, I don't know if I know what you're talking about, but I mean, as a classical realist painter, I guess fundamentally my first thing would be is that I want to be able to paint flesh realistically and I want to achieve someone's likeness. Obviously, it doesn't, that's not where it ends. I mean, I like to think that on some level, I'm revealing some aspect of someone's nature or soul or personality. I like to think I go a little bit further than just painting someone's likeness. But that fundamentally is important to me. So, I mean, I've spent, in the 10 years that I've been painting, I've spent quite a number of years studying colour, studying how to mix flesh tones, just how to put all of that together and what you do with paint and colour to achieve what I think it is that you're trying to say to me. I mean, not everybody, obviously everyone, there's a lot of people who just want to mix colours to do the opposite. They're far more conceptual or, want to be more contemporary. I guess I've just decided to go down that line to explore the colour in terms of to what extent can I really, really portray how I see flesh. I guess
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what I've chosen to do.
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, um, it's like there's a glow underneath the people, and it's a warmth to them, and it's weird because I it's like you're capturing the flesh, but that's not like what I'm perceiving from it, right? It's you're capturing the actual heat that's coming underneath the people, and it's coming through the flesh, right? And so you're painting that, um, uh, but they feel alive, and that's I
Well,
thought that
thank
was
you.
really cool.
I mean, that's what I'm hoping to achieve in portraits. I mean, I think a lot of people are, I think, motivated by different reasons for painting portraiture. I mean, met one woman a little while back who said that when she paints portraits, she likes to pick people to paint who she feels reflects some idea of herself or some emotion of herself, which I
Hmm.
thought was an interesting thing because that never occurs to me. Maybe it comes out in my paint, but it never occurs to me when I paint someone's portrait. I'm completely tied up in who that person is, and I find the whole process fascinating. I feel like I get to know somebody by painting every sort of little aspect of their face, or I think about them when I'm painting. I'm like, why have you got that expression, or what do the lines on your face mean? I feel like it's a completely different process for me in terms of my interest in painting portraits and what I get out of it, I guess.
Hmm. It is that is interesting. I once heard like everything that we create is a self portrait.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so I mean, if it's your personality, like when you were saying when you were at the school, you were like, oh my gosh, I'm loving this, being like all precise and, like you were in your zone.
Mm.
If that wasn't who you were, then you wouldn't be caring about why every little mark on the face is there. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's really ultimately you are painting that person, but that painting is an essay. Really, in your own personality and who you are.
It's definitely an expression of myself. And I think this is why art is such a, or artists feel so vulnerable with their paintings. And I don't think I'm unique in that. I think you do put a lot of yourself, even if you are painting a portrait of someone else, there's an awful lot
Mm-hmm.
of yourself that goes into it. So how people respond to the portrait really becomes a very personal thing, even if you try not to make it or not try not to feel sort of, personally or take comments personally. But I think to a large extent, you sort of, I feel like when I have a painting hanging on a wall in a gallery or whatever, I feel like I might as well hang myself on the wall. I feel like I might as well put a hook on my back and hang myself, because that it feels the same to me. I feel that a sense of being vulnerable, or yeah, it's very much. I don't like to think that in a portrait that I've painted myself. I like to think that I've connected with that person, but I think on some level it still is very much a reflection of yourself.
Indeed, indeed, it is, and one may fight it, but then it's kind of like fighting breathing air, or you just.
Hide it. I know some people particularly say, because I told you, we have a lot of portrait competitions and
Mm-hmm.
prizes here in Australia, and I know that there are some artists who sort of like to think, can they second guess what the judge, or how do they win competitions or whatever. I don't understand that. I think you have to be true to yourself. You have to have some integrity. You've got to paint or draw or create whatever it is you create, and just, I think, have integrity just and maintain that. I don't think you can chase other people's concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. It's interesting when I work with artists to do contests. It'll be interesting because one of the things I do is I go and I look at the old winners, right? And from a design composition perspective, it's interesting because you can like see patterns in what's winning, and
I'm
and
interested that you say that. Like, is that just you, in your opinion, based on fashion, on composition and design, or is that a little bit of fashion as well?
you said fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fashion would come from their perspective, right? What they think is good or not, right? But once they choose certain winners, well, then there's a pattern. I think people are much more pattern oriented, than oh, that thing hit me, and it's like, you know, we're influenced, and we have our tastes, we have our likes, and it's not necessarily what the not it's not necessarily um, good composition or design, right? It just might be what those judges like, and you might like there was this one I remember where um, it was just like the artist who was entering in, her stuff was very she was doing these two portraits, and the people were very cramped. It felt cramped, right? Um, But when you looked at all the winners, the one thing about all the winners is that it just had great space. So I was like, you're going to lose before you've already lost before you've entered in, because just on that frequency of crampedness versus space, it doesn't even feel the same. It's like a banana in a field of apples, right? So, um, uh, so that was the advice to give her, is like figure out how to make that thing feel a lot more space, like there's a lot more space. And so that's what she had to go do, uh and reduced a lot of the value contrast and things to kind of let the eye flow, easier through the image. um and so there are things that you can look for, and it also depends, if every year there's different judges and things, but if the judge has work, then you can go and look at some of their work and see and kind of get a vibe of what they're doing. And And that takes a sensitivity because a lot of it isn't stuff that you can say. It's not like, oh, they paint eyeballs this way, and so therefore paint your eyeballs this way, right?
Mm.
Um, there's a thing I do called an art score, where I have a system where I actually score works of art. And I broke the system down into three sections: the head, heart, and hand. And so your hand is your skill sets, like how well do you master your medium, okay?
Mm.
Those kinds of things. But what's interesting is the head skills are things that you can measure, and they're much more thinking things. For example, color, oftentimes, I consider it a head skill because you can manage color. You can design color in terms of uh, the value of it, the temperature, I mean, the saturation of it, the hue, structure, composition, design, drawing skills, those kinds of things. Those are all like cognitive, like you're really thinking and planning those things out. But then there's things like rhythm, spacing, you know, in a piece, the way it flows and sways. And what's interesting is depending on the person, they may score very high in head oriented skill sets, right? Like factors, but score very low on heart things because they might just be more of an analytical type of person versus someone who's more sensitive and kind of intuitive, right? A lot of times it's the opposite, right? Like they like any like all the thinking parts of it is very low scores, but like they just have an incredible sense of movement, rhythm, spacing, things like that through their artwork because they kind of feel those things better. And so obviously the goal uh, is to be high in all of them, high in your skill sets, but also in your intuitiveness as well as in your conscientiousness of what you're doing. So um, and so when you're looking at like judges' works or whatever or a competition, you want to look at these things, not just the skills that they have, like what you actually see, but also look at 10 of the winners and just absorb and begin to feel patterns, rhythms, because we function at that level. Now, the thing is,
Are you talking about this on sort of like a visual level? Because I feel like if I look at winners of various competitions, at least if I just look here in Australia,
mhm.
I would say that a lot of the time I think it's political or it's
Well, that's the other part of it. The
they're
reality
not
is when you have
necessarily based
competitions
on.
like that, there's a lot of politics, right? And so, um, yeah, that's the reality. So, I mean, if it's truly built on merit,
Mhm.
well, then these things work. If it's not, well, then you're screwed from before you begin,
Yeah,
So,
that one. That one.
yeah, so it's a weird thing because competitions.
I hate them. Can I just tell you? I hate them.
I'm not sure they're very useful.
Yeah, I look in. I don't know what it's like in the US or in Europe for competitions, but in Australia, I'm not sure if you're aware of this,
Oh, I'm
but
aware.
you're
I
aware.
have I have a student in Australia, so um,
Yeah,
I hear about the competitiveness of
yeah.
art competitions and the rigor of them
A lot
often.
of money. It's a lot of money in Australia, and
Uh-huh.
Australia loves to have a superstar. So, it's not about being collective or community or art community or anything like that. It's about who's the next superstar in the art world. And the art prizes are worth a lot of money, and it's publicity. Look, they can be good in terms of boosting your career, getting your name out there if that's what you
Hmm.
want to do, but they're also quite toxic.
Yeah.
They
Well,
drive you
I'll
crazy.
say this. At one time, they were very, very beneficial, right? Oh, I won this award, blah, 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 blah. But all that changes now because of the internet.
Yeah.
You have the ability. See, those were gatekeepers, and
Mm.
and they were knighting you worthy of, and then you could walk around with that great badge, and then people would say, well, you won that award, and the reality is the people who wanted your portrait because they liked you, your personality, and your portfolio never gave a crap about your award. That was really just to kind of show other artists that you're better than them. But but nowadays, you can go direct to consumer. There are no gatekeepers, right? You don't have to go through a gallery. You don't have to go through a rep. You don't have to go through an award, society,
Look,
thing.
that seems to be good and bad. Like, I think that's a great thing about social media is that, you can go directly out there and put your work out there and say, look, this is what I do. And I think in lots of ways that's great for artists. It's great potential. But, at the same time too, there's in Australia, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but galleries are closing left, right and centre here. It's very hard to find galleries, where you sort of want to show your work. And if you do, you're more inclined to just go and hire a space yourself and just do the whole thing yourself.
You should.
It's a very different environment to, I think,
Yep.
20 years ago or whatever, in the art world, because it's I think it operates very differently.
Well, it's like this guy I listened to, Gary Vaynerchuk. He says, cover your ears, kids. I'm going to say something crazy. He says it's like Blockbuster versus Netflix. He said, when Netflix came along and Blockbuster, they looked at their customer data, and it said that the customers enjoyed coming into the store, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the customers really enjoyed opening up the cases and reading the DVDs and things like that. And then and they also, what they liked was the fact that you run into people, you are, like your neighbors and stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
And these were all great things, hey, we're going to go over to the video store and get a video. But then Blockbuster came along. Netflix came along, and Gary says, you know what I like to do? I like to lay in bed naked and hit a button, right? Like that, meaning like, well, I don't have to get in my car. I don't have to drive anywhere. I don't have to, I don't have to buy anything. Like I just hit a button, right? And it just becomes so much easier, and I have what I want, which is this movie.
Mm.
But that's what's happening in all industries, because the internet has made it's given the power to the people. Now, at some point, you're going to have governments and big businesses come in and begin to take that power back. Okay, I mean, I won't get into. Well, yeah, I won't get into it. But but right now, the internet's like only 20 years old. I mean, it's not even out. It's like halfway through college, right?
Mm.
Um, I remember one guy said about 5 years ago, he's like, the internet's so young, it hasn't even had sex yet, right?
Mm.
Like, and it's already flipping the world upside down. So imagine in another 10, 20 years when it becomes much more mature. And the thing is artists need to figure out how to use it.
Mm.
They have to. I mean, if you don't, the gallery systems, all those old systems are dying.
Mm.
Because there was an Italian curator, and I think this is a big part of why this big move in realism came about over the last, say, 20 years, is that people were just getting tired of being called, when looking at art, they would say, wait, the emperor has no clothes on, right? Like, this is foolishness.
Yeah.
And but the elites, the gatekeepers, would say, the reason why you can't see it is because you're stupid.
Mm.
Go.
Can I just say that sort of stuff drives me, but like the older I get, the less patience I have with. I mean, I'm a realist, so and I kind of sympathise with what you're talking about, because I go to exhibitions now, a lot of contemporary exhibitions, and I get to about the fourth word of someone's blurb on their artwork, and I can't do it. I just can't do it. I can't read it. I can't be bothered reading it. I'm very tired of what I feel like is a whole lot of superficial nonsense in the art world at times.
Yep.
And I think this is part of what motivates me to actually paint the way I do. The fact that I've gone to classical painting to the extent that I do, I feel like I'm constantly searching for something that feels more sustained or real. And I don't know whether this is just my age or life experiences or what it is, but that's sort of something which I feel drawn to for that, partly for that reason. Yeah.
I always say to that, I'm going to be a little voice in the room that's going to piss off a lot of realists. Okay. Because
me being one of them, maybe.
because in truth, there's an incredible respect first that has to be given for the skill of being able to do what people do, as a realist. I mean, I always say, like, because of this abstract expressionism and all this superficial nonsense and bullshit out there, that the natural tendency was to go the opposite way, to the point like no one ever is going to look at a realism painting and say my 5-year-old can do that, right? And that's not even part of the conversation. I mean, there's just respect that you have to give a person who has that skill set. Now, from that place, now I'll look at a Jackson Pollock and I'll give Jackson Pollock respect for his ability to throw paint, because the way he does it is he's just not throwing paint. Now, personally, I don't consider him an artist at that level, but as a craftsman, he's incredible. But at some point, like, there has to be a deeper level to it, and and that's where I see the next evolution coming in the arts. It's coming back to a set of skills, but now you have this incredible skills, but what are you saying with it? And there will be a kind of a reckoning where we'll bring meaning and connection and soul back into married with that high skill set as well. And so
I think that does go on. I mean, I think there are people who are doing that, and that it just comes down and back to partly your whole motivation for painting. You can look. I've just been to Russia in January. I went to Russia for a month and studied. Just looked at a lot of the Russian art. I wanted to go and see the Russian artists, and particularly 19th century Russian artists.
Oh, absolutely, great.
But if you look at what's going on in the history of Russia around these times, 20th century Russian art too, like, just the revolutions and all these things that are going on. And yet there are still people who paint landscapes and beautiful scenes, as well as people who are painting stories about what is going on. And I think, there should be room for all of it. Not everybody should be required to be making a social commentary in their painting. There are some people who are motivated to do that, or who are good at doing that, but it shouldn't have to be the only thing that's rewarded or admired in art. And everyone has different motivations, but I feel that a lot of art these days has to have a social commentary to be seen as being conceptual, like being seen as being contemporary or relevant.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I actually think that's a weakness.
That's part of what goes on out there. And if you do what I do and paint as a realist painter, I think a lot of people criticize you. They say, why don't you just take a photo? I guess I would say to that, anybody should come along to one of my art classes and draw from life and see how they go at creating that photo. They think that they're so easy to do. I don't know. I get a bit frustrated with sometimes the fact that there doesn't seem to be room for everyone. It's sort of, I feel as a classical painter, especially in my country anyway, I feel to be a painter like that, to want to do that, you are seen as being a little bit irrelevant and unfashionable. And I I just feel confused about that a little bit. I can go and admire a whole lot of other contemporary paintings and artworks, and I admire people's ability to do things that I can't do, but I don't think that should be all that art is. And really, I have got to a stage in my short painting career where I don't call myself an artist, I call myself a painter. I think the word artist is a very different thing these days. It's got a different meaning to what it perhaps once had, and that's fine. That happens all the time. But I don't know if I would just classify myself an artist. I'm a painter.
It's interesting because I meet a lot of people who are incredible painters. And I would even throw in the incredible drawers. Like they can render, draw, represent, paint really freaking well. Like incredibly well. and and that it's kind of like being a great writer or a great singer. I mean, you have to have a voice. You have to have that skill set. And then you have to be able to write. You have to know the language, right? But now the question is, once you've mastered that, well, what is it that you want to say? And it may not just be a political thing. It might, Cezanne, I think, I have a definition. I call it story, right? As an illustrator, you might create a more of a narrative story, something that's kind of like obvious, okay? If Jack and Jill went up the hill, right? But Cezanne says what we're painting are sensations. And so it could be a moment, much more of a soul that you're painting inside something. It could be a sensation or a feeling, like a concept. And I just saw this painting yesterday by Joseph DeCamp, and it was just brilliant because it was called The Guitar Player, right? And it was a woman with a guitar, and it was incredible. But for me, the magic had nothing to do with the woman playing the guitar, actually. And if you follow the design, it actually bypassed the guitar. So on the surface, it was a woman with a guitar. But above her was this incredible space. And it took your eye a moment to descend gently before her head, which was this beautiful dark contrast against this light background, grabbed your attention, right? And then the way that he takes one side of the shoulder, the neck and the shoulder, and has a higher contrast where the other side kind of fades a little bit more into the background. It brings your eye over to that side. And then through her dress, it swoops you over. And so when you look at the design that's embedded in the context of this beautiful painting of a woman with a guitar, he's not painting a woman playing the guitar. He's playing a woman at the moment in which she finally gets the that's what I'm going to play. Right? That takes it to a whole nother level outside of just the ability to paint this incredible painting, but to capture that moment of that's what I'm going to play. Like that moment when you realize this is what you're going to play. And I went through a whole bunch of his paintings very, very quickly, and every single one of them. There's this one where this lady's holding a bird, and the bird cage is there, right? And if you ask anybody what this moment is about, they'll say, "Well, she's putting the bird's going to go in the bird cage." But it's like, why do you know that? And it's because the way he angles the bird, your eye then naturally guides the way it is. It'll actually move over her shoulders into the bird cage. So he's giving you like this little line for the bird to actually just flutter up a little bit and descend into the bird cage, and it becomes like this little animation. And and he has this one called the Hemlock, which was just incredible because it's a mom with her baby and her little daughter, and she's sitting on this hemlock, but he designed it in a way that your eyes actually bounce back and forth between these 2 points. And when you just allow your eye to bounce back between them, maybe 2-3 times, all of a sudden the hemlock shifts. It literally moves back and forth, right? Like he's triggering an animation by the way he's designed it so that the eyes bounce in it, right? obviously the drawing and the painting is incredible, but in all of these things, it's like there's a whole nother level that he's giving people an experience. Um, and he's crafted in this great drawing, this great painting, but he's delivering an experience to the viewer. And that's where I want to see art go. I want to see people who have incredible skill, who've taken the time to master that, to be able to then deliver a very dynamic experience. And that's something that is coming back. It's being restored. And but I'm excited, hope to see that really like big again in my lifetime. Sorry, I went on a little rant there for a second.
Right.
It's like a Degas painting. What's interesting, the more and more I look at Degas, is that Degas is painting. He's not painting dancers; he's painting a dance. And so, oftentimes, if you look at the dancers in his paintings, they're actually in different poses, but they're in different poses of the same dance. And if you allow your eye just to move through it, you'll realize, like, oh my gosh, that girl she just swung back around and then threw her leg out, and then she ended, right? She just did the complete dance. And it gives a very different experience to the image. And so you have these different styles and whatever, but I wanted to ask you about one of your paintings. There was a painting I saw, and I was like, why in the world does this look so familiar? Why? And I think I figured out why. I'm going to mispronounce her name, but you had a painting of Dr. Catherine Hamlin? Helen. Mm-hmm. And she had a beautiful blanket next to her.
Yeah.
Is she the doctor who helped the ladies in Ethiopia?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So that portrait of Dr. Catherine Hamlin, that was a painting that I had accepted. We talk about art prizes, into Australia's probably most prestigious portrait prize. Mm. And that probably was the one painting that launched my art career as a portrait painter, I guess.
Wow.
That work accepted into that art prize. I'm fortunate because she is an Australian. Dr. Catherine Hamlin is an Australian, and she was in Australia raising funds for her work in Ethiopia, and she basically she spent her life doing that, raising funds to do that. So in other words, she's not getting funded by the government or anything like that. She's raising her own money to help these women and has dedicated her life to it. And I was fortunate enough to meet her here in Sydney and paint her portrait. That is the only painted portrait of Catherine Hamlin.
Oh, wow. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
She's a pretty amazing, inspiring Australian. She'd be one of Australia's top, she's up there in terms of how people feel about her work.
That's awesome. Yeah, Australians are very cool people. I'm thinking, like, there are two that have really impacted my life greatly, and she was one of them. And I remember years and years ago, I saw this show on Oprah, and I think she was on there, but they were talking about her work. Actually, both these people came from Oprah.
Well, just before you go on with that, like in that painting, she's got a blanket underneath her arm, and look, when she came to a portrait sitting, and I saw her dressed in that clothes, that was the first thing that made me flip. But the blanket is actually the squares in the blanket are all knitted by volunteers in Australia, and then volunteers actually assemble the blankets and they get sent to Ethiopia. And every who is treated at the hospital is given the blanket as a gift when she leaves the hospital.
Yeah.
So that was the significance. The blanket wasn't in there because she's an older lady sitting in a chair, needing a blanket to keep her warm. It has a meaning, and the Ethiopian flag is actually the colours that sit in the front of the blanket on the chair.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. That's incredible. That's awesome. Yeah, it was. It's funny that was the painting that kind of set off your career, right? And my last show, I did a series of paintings to bring awareness to her work, and so I painted those blankets in there as well. And I had women wrapped up in them, and the babies were wrapped up in them, and Um, and so when I saw that, I was like, whoa, wait a second here. Like, that's cool. But yeah, when I saw her story, it really hit me. And I was like, I got to do something. I got to do a show or something to bring awareness, to help that work. And later that year, I went back to study under my drawing master, who recently just passed away. And there was a young girl, and we were talking, and so she invited a group of us over to her little apartment because her mom was coming in. I say younger, I mean she's probably in her 20s or whatever, but and it just so happened her mom was part of worked for the Fistula Foundation, and so that's how I kind of got connected to them. And so it was just a very weird coincidence.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing doing a series of paintings and doing a show called Designing Dignity, because the blankets were a way of giving the ladies dignity and the whole operation and everything. So it was, that was cool. I was surprised when I saw that picture come up. It was a nice treat.
Well, I'm actually sitting here in my home looking at that painting at the moment, as you talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's on my wall here at home.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Dang. So do you do anything else with them still, or?
Well, the main office for the organisation is not far from me. I'm here in Sydney.
Oh, wow.
And they do a lot of fundraising for a lot of people here in Sydney, women in particular, volunteer to do a lot of fundraising for them. So they have approached me. I don't actually specifically do things for them, but quite often they've asked, can they use my image or print cards of the image to use for promotional things of that sort of nature. And I'm always happy for them to do that kind of thing. I have donated to the Hamlin Fistula organisation. You can donate amounts of money for operations or procedures or various things. And I think a lot of women, particularly in the area that I live in here in Sydney, there's a lot of people who support her and support the work that the organisation does. So she's very well known. We even have a Sydney ferry named after Dr. Catherine Hamlin.
Oh, really? That's awesome. That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So, outside of going from Australia to Italy to do on one of your personal pilgrimages, kind of curious. Have you gone anywhere else to expand yourself in art?
I went to France. I went to Paris some years back, and I did a workshop over there with Studio Escalier in Paris, and spent 3 weeks touring in the Louvre. I went to New York after that, to the Grand Central Academy, and studied over there for a short period, doing portraiture, that kind of thing. And then I've travelled more sort of since then, just to go looking at art. So when I get the opportunity, especially to travel overseas, I mean, we don't get a lot of we do get exhibitions here, but Australia doesn't have the art that other places around the world have. So a lot of have to go and travel to see it. So, I mean, I've just been to Russia for a month, and my entire reason for going was to go and spend time in the state Russian, in the Tretyakov, in the Hermitage, and just to stand in front of paintings and look at them and kind of be able to analyze them, say, why do I respect them? Why do I like them? Why have I stopped in front of a painting to look at it? What was it? Was it the composition? Was it the way it's painted? A whole lot of things. And I think really, you gain so much from actually just going and looking at art, just giving yourself the time to go to galleries and look at great paintings.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that you went to Russia and looked at that. And anyone who's listening, I totally would encourage you to take a look at Russian artwork and artists, because Russia was closed off for so long, they did not allow the abstract expressionism movement to enter into it. And so it preserved a lot of the traditions that were lost because of, in most of the world, because of the abstract expressionism in the modern art and that kind of stuff that came into it. And so they, I've talked to some Russian artists before, and I was fascinated by their focus on composition, because in the U.S., you might take a composition class inside of a bigger class, so you might get 2 weeks of focus on that if you're lucky. To be honest, it angers me, to be quite honest, at the lack of training in these things. But in Russia, you go to school like 4 or 5 years, and there's like five topics, and one of them every week for 5 years is composition. Like, it's like so important to them is composing these images.
I went into the Russian Academy while I was in St. Petersburg, and just their gallery allowed for the artwork within the school for students to look at and think about. It is extraordinary. And I mean, look, I even though I'm a classical painter, I admire a whole lot of different styles of painting. But I would say to any young student, I would say go and spend a year learning classically. Go to school where you can learn. It's like learning to play the piano. You can't do anything interesting on the piano if you haven't learned the notes and haven't learned the scales and haven't learned the basics. Go and learn to draw, go and learn to see, go and learn to mix colours, understand colour, understand composition, and then when you have that underneath you, go and do something exciting that's conceptual or interesting, or tell the story that you need to tell. But it's something fundamental underneath that, because I feel that that a lot of young artists just fumble about. They've got great ideas, but don't necessarily have the strength in how to produce their ideas.
I agree with you 100%. It's in an environment like that, you're going to learn the discipline of making art, like the actual discipline of and the ideas are great, but if you don't have that discipline behind it, then, like you said, that's the bottom line.
Somewhere to go from. Like, if you want to stretch boundaries, you've got to know what the boundaries are before you stretch them. And I think this is where having some sort of real understanding or skill base that you get from various academies. And look, and I know there are places in the US. I mean, believe it or not, there's a lot of Australians who travel to New York or to different academies over in the US, to the Grand Central, to Arts League. They also go to, there's other ones in Texas and other parts of the States. They go to Florence, to the Florence Academy. There's a lot of people venturing out into these various schools because they want the skills. They don't want just 1 or 2 lessons in something. They really want something fundamental. They can go from there and take their art wherever it is that they want to take it. And I think I think you can always tell when people understand what they're doing with composition, with colour, whether it's an abstract painting or not. Looking at something good, and that's usually because that artist has a pretty good idea of all of those things: colour, design, composition, paint handling or the handling of materials, whatever.
Yep. It's interesting how many things you need to learn and even have some level of mastery over for it all to come together to produce, you know, um, something quite amazing and on a consistent basis. It's and that's it's interesting. We live in a world today where our artists are looked down upon, and it's a very strange thing because I often think, man, like at one time artists were brought in to live among the kings, and at one time in society when you had like your hunter gatherer groups, you had hunter gatherers and you had your shaman, which were really kind of the artists in the group. And now they serve a couple functions as the artist, as the priest, the doctor, like all that stuff.
I think I would argue that part of that, and I might be very wrong because it's not like I'm an intellectual here who can sort of really give great wisdom, but I just think that because the whole concept of art in lots of ways has been eroded. I mean, you can vomit on the floor and be called an artist if you say it's art. And I think there's a lot of people just generally out there who are very cynical about that. So if you say you want to be an artist, they kind of look at you as if to say, well, yeah, right. What are you going to do with your life?
Yep.
I think that's a problem. And it's, I find it a little bit distressing. I feel like in some ways things just get pushed to the ridiculous to such an extent that it doesn't do us artists in general any great service.
I agree with you 100%, and that's what one of the frustrations when you have a lot of great artists who then have to push against that nonsense. I have a couple of friends, and I interviewed this one girl the other day from China. It's huge in Asian culture. Like, what, you want to be an artist? Like, like get real. Like to do that requires a pivotal moment where you have to stand up and either tell your family or your community, like, no, this is who I am. Anything else, I'm going to die. Right. Literally. And so, but in the Western world, you can get away with it a little bit better, but it's still there. And what's sad is we're taught, when you're a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a doctor, and you get praised for it, and I want to be an artist. It's like, okay, that's a nice hobby. Go find, a job. And what's strange is it's like that the mind of a doctor and the mind of the artist are very, very similar, very similar. Oftentimes you'll talk to a doctor who wanted to be an artist, but made the quote unquote practical decision to be a doctor.
Yeah, and we can't make any money as an artist. That's, I mean, unless you're at the pointy end, there's only money for a few, but everyone else is struggling.
But that's how it is in any career, I would think. You got to.
Just art seems to be a little bit more like that at times. I mean, it's the same for musicians, I guess, and anybody who ventures into a creative industry. It's very difficult to financially have a stable life. I wouldn't necessarily describe success, because success for people comes in different forms, different things, but it's very hard to survive.
Yeah. My dad once said, either you find a way to make money so you can paint what you want to paint, or you paint what other people want you to paint.
That's right.
And
oh dear.
And that's, it's interesting because years ago you would find your patrons, and things like that. And again, we come back to the internet because there are ways to make money, and there might have to be part of your artistic business plan is to figure out how to leverage the internet to make money. And it might not just be merchandising your images, right? It might be something that has nothing to do directly with your art, but but it may give you an income that you can bring into your home or whatever. Uh, but again, that requires a discipline, and that's, I think, where the big divide comes in artists is like you can tell the ones who have the discipline because it shows up in their work. It's like clear. And but yeah, it's interesting. So let me ask you before we want to ask you, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years, 10 years? Like, where do you want to push your artwork to?
Look, I don't know if I really have an answer to that. I mean, I've started painting very late in life. I mean, I didn't start painting till I was in my 40s.
Okay.
Don't know if I should reveal that.
Well, 10 years ago. Okay.
And I feel a little bit that as a middle-aged woman that I don't really know if I could see myself as having an art career, because I don't think people are really too interested in somebody who's my age and female. That's being a bit cynical, isn't it? Being a bit
Very. I would totally think it would be the opposite. I would think this is the age of the woman.
If I was young, maybe. If I was younger, I think there is a little bit of people or interested in wanting to watch somebody progress through their life as an artist, and so I think that's a bit of a struggle for me. I would say mainly, look, I'm lucky because I can afford to paint, and that's a privileged position to be in. And I would say that in terms of going ahead, I just want to be able to paint no matter what, whether I'm seen as being successful in my career or whatever. To me, it's about community. To me, it's about being with people who paint. It's about how I live my life. It's much more than just whether I have an art career. This is now how I choose to live and how I want to live. I want to be able to share what I do with other people. I'm just on a journey. I'm somewhere in the middle of it. And whatever I know, I'd like to think I can share with others, to teach others, and I like to think that I can continue to learn from other people. This is about how I want to live my life more than it is about where I see myself in terms of what I've achieved. I just want to paint and continue to produce good paintings.
That's awesome. So do you see yourself as in the future, do you see yourself having more community, or do you see yourself teaching more?
I don't know that I see myself necessarily teaching more, but I'm happy to do so if the opportunity, like I'm about to head out of Sydney tomorrow, drive 4 hours to run a weekend workshop, just for people want to learn to do what it is or paint the way that I paint. And
Cool.
I think it's important to share what you know. I think I really have enormous respect for others in my life who have generously shared what they know with me, and I think that's what it should be about. I think community and art community to me is very important. It's sort of more important than perhaps anything else.
That's awesome. I love that. That's really cool. So what is it that you do then in these workshops that you're doing?
Well, look, they actually all sorts of different things. Like I've got a portrait workshop where I will have a model and we actually paint from the model the same pose for 3 days. When I teach,
nice.
I teach at the Julian Ashton Art School. I teach every Saturday, and I have the same pose, the same model, and the same pose there for 10 weeks. So for me, it's about helping people to work on a painting in a sustained manner. I mean, they can go to lots of other classes where they can do quick things or whatever. But for me, I'm just teaching people to be able to persevere and take something to another level. So that's kind of more of what I'm prepared to teach. But I also get together with groups of artists. I have a studio, and I have enough space for about 10 to 12 people to paint, and I get a model in and we all share the cost of the model, and we just have painting days or painting weeks where we just go and paint for a week and just share our knowledge, share our conversation, just be part of a community of people who enjoy doing that. It's really grassroots sort of stuff. It's not about selling yourself. It's just about that whole art community.
I love that. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. I absolutely love that. So now you have me ask. I want to ask you the most important question that I've asked you this entire time, and that is piggybacking off of this idea of community. Um, what is it that you like to eat?
Oh dear. I know that there was a question I saw when you were sort of, briefing about all this. It says, cook. And I said, I don't like to cook.
Oh, okay, cool.
Cooking is not my favorite thing. I like to paint. I don't want to spend time cooking. Favorite food? I don't know. Look, I don't know about whether I have a favorite meal. I eat sort of just about most things, I guess, and I don't know if I have a favorite. I would say that my most comforting thing would be to go and have a cup of tea with somebody, a nice cup of tea brewed in a pot.
That's cool. So which is more important, the tea or the company?
The company.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah.
It's about the community.
And as far as the food goes, if somebody else has cooked it, then I like it twice as much as if I've cooked it.
That's nice. That's nice. That's very, very cool. Is there something that when you were growing up that you used to eat that you loved?
Oh, I would say for me, a lot of my childhood was on beaches around north of Sydney. And
Okay.
so with my parents, I used to go fishing, doing a lot of fishing. So we used to eat a lot of catch fish and eat a lot of fish. And
Really?
oysters, to go to the rocks, to the big sea walls, and we'd take oysters off the rocks and we'd sit on the rocks and just eat oysters straight from the ocean.
What?
Yeah, and I would say that they are pretty fond memories of, say, family and food and things like that, I guess, would be based around. And I mean, it's very much Christmas time for us is often seafood. Like, we're not inclined to be having so much your traditional pork roast or whatever. We occasionally do that. But you're more likely to have lobsters and prawns and oysters. And I think that if I was going to sort of say anything at all, it would be really the fresh seafood, which has been part of my growing up, I guess.
That's awesome. Wow. That's so cool. That's something with Australia that kind of throws me for a loop sometimes. Like, your Christmas is like on a beach. Yeah. It's like,
hot.
what?
Very hot.
So, yeah. Very, very cool. Very cool, Miss Sally. I call you Miss Sally. So if people want to get in touch with you, Sally, how can they do that?
Oh, probably the easiest thing is by email. I guess it's if people kind of really want to get in touch. I'm happy to talk to people by phone too, but generally speaking, probably email's the easiest way to contact me. I mean, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. People can make contact with me via Facebook and Instagram too.
And do you have a website for people to see your work?
Yeah, I do. I do have a website. Yeah, www.sallyryanartist.com.
Okay.
Yeah, so people can see my work there. Yeah.
Awesome. In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlying structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.